Hello, and welcome to the next tour with
Ian?
and Andia. And today we are on episode 3, and we're talking about transition and benefits planning. And we have a guest today that is Heather Walrath. And she is, she has been married for 26 and a half years.
Yay.
She and her spouse was active duty for 25 and a half years and retired on 1 January 2023, exactly 1 year before you.
Absolutely.
And she is a financial counselor and a military benefit liaison. Did I say that right? Military benefits liaison with Navy Mutual. Welcome, Heather.
So good to have you.
Perfect. You said it all exactly right. Yeah.
Yay.
Absolutely.
We're so happy to have you. We are going to jump right in. We've got lots to chat about today.
Yes, and it's so good to see you again, Heather. I know that the first time that we met in person was at my transition assistance program, where you briefed on the survivor benefit program or the survivor benefit plan, and ensured. Did I say that right?
You did.
Let me do that. Okay, got it. There we go. SBP. We'll just call it short for now. And as I got to know you and really listened to you, that really was very helpful and informative in how we made our election for SBP. So kind of to that end, I think the first thing that is probably due to our guests is tell us a little bit about how you and your husband transitioned, how that affected, your career, in what you do now, and then how you are continuing to pay that forward in helping others in their transition.
Perfect. Great. Well, that's a lot to answer there in the first question. I mean, you're hitting the ground running, but
go big or go home, right?
Love it. Yeah. So my story, Sean and I met when he was in ROTC, University of Georgia, go Dogs, right? And I remember telling him, all right, so this military thing, this will be like 4 years, right? Well, fast forward, things worked a little differently, right? And part of that was the benefits, right? It was a great way of life, but we had a lot of deployments during that time. He actually had 9 deployments. And when we reflect back, thinking about this, it was an interesting time to serve, just as you know, because really for 20 years of his career, we were at war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that went way differently than we thought, but it's also the only way we ever knew, right? We didn't have anything to compare it to. So for most of his career, I didn't work full time. With all those deployments, we had 2 kids. Back in 2009, I got the FINRA Military Spouse Fellowship to become an AFC, an Accredited Financial Counselor. Yeah, new program, right?
Yes.
So then I would volunteer, in different capacities. I would work, part-time, Guard Reserve events and things like that. So that was kind of my journey. My career was kind of always second. Because, we had the Air Force that was always first. And, how did we pivot into that? He always had to be available for the Air Force. So I had to always be available for the family, right? We avoided the Pentagon for 21 years, right? And then at 21 years, they're like, hey, you're going to the Pentagon. Well, this is a very different space. We're still here in DC. And honestly, I think it was a great place for me to transition, right? Because I was always, full time. We came from command to DC where it was like full throttle, right? You're involved, you're doing all the spouse things, you're doing the coffees, you're doing all the advocacy things. And then when you get to DC, it's just a very different space, right? Because you don't really have the same kind of squadron functions and things like that. So it allowed me to kind of take a step back from that and then focus more on my career opportunities. So, I started part-time doing more here in the National Capital Region. Boys were older. They didn't want me anymore, right? So it wasn't cool for me to show up at school, So it was a really nice path for me to kind of find myself, but also fill that role as being in the family space for so long, still being an advocate. Right. So how could we assist? So as that transition happened, I had something to fall back on that gave me a little bit of an identity, right? Because I think that's hard too. You transition, you're used to, being part of the unit, having that purpose, caring for all the families, doing all that kind of work. So how do you continue to still make a difference, but use your own headspace? So I think, for some reasons that was a good place to be here. I was able to kind of start focusing on my career a little bit more before he started taking a back seat from his career. But I will say I taught transition for several years before we hit the button ourselves. Living it, that's a completely different ballgame, right? So now that we've been through it, just like you guys, you're like, oh, we have to see. Now I understand a little bit more. Okay, what do we really need to talk about, right? What's really the important stuff? Okay, here's the curriculum. Yeah, read the book, but what's beyond that, right? How can we help each other really, beyond, all the bureaucracy and all the boxes that we have to check? So that's kind of where we landed.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks for that, Heather. And I just want to say that how you described it, right? Being able to really kind of, figure out yourself, that's important. And I really appreciated that. And that really came through to me when you gave your presentation, when I sat through, TAP and did that. So being able to have that connection and see that your passion is being able to give back while simultaneously filling that bucket inside, for yourself, that really resonated with me, gosh, a year and a half ago, I think, when I sat through that program. So you were certainly at the top of our list, to be able to come and share your experience with us. So thanks for that quick overview.
Yeah. And it's funny how much we hear about transition, prepare for a transition, but no matter what, like, until you actually go through it, it's hard to even know what questions to ask. And I think, that's what kind of really instilled in us the reason of doing this. Let's ask these questions. Let's get this thing out. So I think one of the things I'd like to ask you, and I think this is always funny, we're going to ask this for most of our guests, is that, what was something that surprised you about transition? So something that you did not expect.
One thing that I learned that I think was really helpful is to not focus on the word retirement, right? Even if you are retirement, right? Focus on next chapter, right? Because I will tell you, for 26 years, I had my little file folder. This is the house that I want. This is the location I want to be in. These are all the special things. And when we retire and we leave this next chapter, that's when all that will happen. Well, we never in a million years dreamed we would stay here in DC. Those children always affect your plans, right? We're like, let's not move the boys in the middle of high school. Let's, finish. So it was really next chapter. Now I have a, 1968 one-car garage house that cost way more than I'm comfortable saying, right? Because that wasn't part of the plan. But it's next chapter, right? And once the boys graduate, we only got one left here, then we're going to say, what's the next chapter after that, right? And that might be more of moving back with our parents, which I never thought, a million years I'd want to go back there. But they're starting to need us now, right? Whereas the kids are a little bit more independent, the parents might want us. So I think, thinking of it as smaller pieces, what is the next chapter for us right now? What is the right space for us to be in now? And not being so overwhelmed by having to figure out like such a long-term, this is my retirement, right?
Yeah.
Now, we have actually lived in DC now almost 8 years, which is the longest I have lived anywhere. And I've got the bug. I'm like, I got to paint something. I got to like redo something in the house, right? Because I'm tired of the same space, right? Because we're used to moving every 3 years. And I'm coming to the realization that the house I thought I wanted 5 years ago, it's really not what I want anymore, right? Because as our lives change and the people in that space change. So I think that was the biggest thing, is to think about when you're transitioning, whether it's retirement or, you're separating, what is my next chapter? And just do what is right in the space that you're in, I think is a really important way to think about it. And it's a little bit less overwhelming that way, right? To take it in smaller pieces.
Yeah, I think, might I say, the next tour.
Even better.
Very on the nose, right?
I know.
Even
Sorry,
better.
I had to throw that in there. But I think you're right. And actually, I stopped using the word retirement when I talked to folks about Ian and his, transition out of active service, because they would say, "Oh, he's retired. What's he doing? Fishing, hunting?" Like, I'm like, "Oh, no. Like, he's still working. Like, he just retired from the military." But if you're not used to the military space, and with my job, I run into people a lot that are not in the military space, And so to them, like retirement has a different meaning, right?
does.
So
They probably think I'm much older than I am.
yeah, which you're actually younger than me.
Yeah.
So so we try not to say the word old very often, but I do think that's a really good point. So I like that, the next chapter, next tour, whatever you'd want to call it. But I think that's such a great point. And you know, drawing that line in the sand of like, this is exactly what I want to do and what I plan to do. And just, you know, as we are flexible and we're used to this life of moving around and doing different things, I think pivoting and realizing those different paths we're going to take makes a lot of sense. So thanks for that. I love that answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And those chapters that you know, they don't stop, which I think that was a really important point that you made there. You know, not just with getting off of active duty, but then, you know, with the schools. And I think that's a really, really good kind of perspective to be able to share out there. So speaking of perspective, as you all went through your transition and as you learned things beyond the curriculum, what was one thing that you found to be untrue about what you all heard leading up to your transition?
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about VA benefits, right? That's one of the biggest things. And I try to address that a little bit in class as well, because, you know, the reality is the VA is run by people, right? It's not this machine, you know, that you just press go and then and in 90 days it spits out the answer, right? So that whole process, right, of applying for VA benefits and the misconception, especially with the benefits delivery at discharge, that BDD process, so many people think, oh, well, 30 days after I am out, I will have my rating, and then I'll know how much my compensation is, and I will know exactly when I will receive it. And that is just not the case. It is just so all over the place, you know, about that as to when you will get a decision. I also think I didn't anticipate that being as difficult to do, you know, in terms of the emotional aspect of it for my husband, right? Because I'm very much like, oh, here's the checklist. Oh, that's just part of the process. We need to get you in. Well, the reality was, you know, just transitioning was enough, right? Losing that identity. He didn't want to sit there and think about how all the way the service had affected him, right? You know, the ways that, you know, he had changed physically and mentally. So he just kind of had to put that aside for a little while, right? And I had to be patient about that, right? Because I'm like, let's finish this, great, and finish this chapter so we can move on to the next chapter. I can't have these little pieces lingering, right? It needs to be done. But I had to be patient, right? Because he needed that space to just kind of, you know, take it in and come to terms with how he had changed, right? So that was something that I wasn't getting, that real emotional piece. I'm like, well, don't you want to get the compensation for what happened? He really didn't care, right? He just wanted to be okay, you know, I didn't go to appointments and things like that. So that was kind of surprising, right? So I always encourage people to give that transitioning service member the space, right, to do that. Because the reality is that, you know, anything you file within your first year of separating, when you have a decision about your rating, it's going to be retroactive to that separation date. So whether you're ready to hit that button and submit it, you know, as part of that BDD, or if you need to wait a good 6 months, you know, kind of let the dust settle, you know, it should be the same. And I think you need to give yourself space to really do a complete claim. So, you know, that was one of the biggest things. I also really feel strongly that everybody needs to use transitioning resources. So, you know, after 26 years, there was a part of my husband that's like, I got this. You know, I don't need to do a skill bridge. I knew as a spouse, oh yes, you do, right? Because you need, you know, a little bit of hand holding and a little bit of being in that peer space, right? So we were lucky when he did retire. They were very supportive of him doing the Skill Bridge program, and he actually did one with Hiring Our Heroes. You know, I know it's changed a lot. Sometimes people don't get the same kind of opportunity, or the timing doesn't work out. But any type of resource that you can use to go through the transition and be with your peers, right? And I will say the program he did had all kinds of people. You know, had people that were separating after 4 or 6 years, retiring at 30. But then there were kind of mentorship opportunities, within that group for them to share with each other. So I think the TAP program is good. Unfortunately, there's a lot of inconsistencies about it depending on where you go, right? Some programs have a little better facilitators and things like that than others, but the information is good, but that peer support is super important with that.
Yeah, no, those are fantastic points. And I really appreciate you bringing up both of those. So, we found that as going through our transition, there's a lot that humans interact with as you go through that. For me, one of the best pieces of advice that I got as we were filling out all the paperwork for my claim was, for me to take the time to sit there and do a self-evaluation, but then hand the paperwork to her. Because there's a lot of stuff that I think that I was unwilling to admit or really didn't recognize as important,
Right.
to be able to get an evaluation on. So that was a really great thing to have both of us look at it separately, then come together and have a conversation about it, and then take that and have that honest conversation with my provider, and really kind of explore that and see, was there really an issue there or not? So that's really great perspective on that piece on what you found really to be kind of a little bit untrue, but being able to kind of pay that forward. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I also love what you said about using different programs. So Hiring Our Heroes is an amazing program. And I'm so glad you mentioned timing because it did not work for him. We had actually booked a cruise and already paid for
first world problem.
I know,
right?
I know. It was such a problem. It's kind of funny to admit, but it's true. And we had planned this for a long time, and he had looked into Hiring Our Heroes, and the fellowship did not work in his time. And so he did other programs like 4Block and
America Corporate
Partners.
Yep.
And so we're going to at some point have folks on to talk about those programs as well. But I think you're spot on. Find those programs, talk to peers, see what worked and what didn't work, or just open your aperture and think about the different things. TAP is not the be all end all. A great information dump, but it's a lot to.
It's a launching point,
right? It's a lot to digest. And a lot of times spouses, although invited to the transition assistance program, are unable to attend because of space issues. So, Ian talked at the beginning about how he met you. And that was actually how I met you too. I was in virtual space when you gave the briefing to his TAP program. Nope. Repeating a word there.
To TAP.
TAP. So I thought what was great, actually, I was texting him when you were briefing and I was like, oh no, I did a thumbs down. That's sad. I should not talk with my hands so much. So I texted Ian while you were giving your briefing and I said, please get her information. I would love to reach out to her. And I think it's so funny that you and I had not met before that point because we are both AFCs.
We've been in spaces together, but not,
both FINRA Foundation fellows, as you mentioned at the beginning. So, but had never had many mutual friends, but had never actually met each other. So the one thing, from that briefing was obviously you spoke about survivor benefit plan. So I want to pivot to that a little bit. And I'm going to warn everyone, this is a soapbox item for me. I feel very passionate about SBP. And the reason I'm passionate about it is because I think a lot of times it is not given its due as far as the thought process that goes into deciding whether you will elect or not. And I think that people tend to give it a simple answer. So I want to encourage everyone to just not make a quick decision about SBP. I think I've heard that, SBP can be replaced with life insurance. And that is one of the things that I think people need to dig into that, peel that onion back a little bit and think that through a little bit more. And when you gave the briefing to Ian's TAP class, I think you did a really eloquent job of speaking about SBP.
Both what it is and what it isn't.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, this discussion around SBP, the survivor benefit plan is only available to those that are retiring or medically retiring. So we do understand that this is only like a portion of our audience that maybe will be at this point where they're deciding about the survivor benefit plan. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about it and really, I guess, educate everyone on, like Ian said, what it is and what it isn't. So over to you.
Sure. All right. And again, I appreciate you recognizing that there's just so much, information out there. And what it comes down to is it can be a very valuable benefit, but the value of it is different for everyone, right? Because the value of the benefit is based on your years of service and your pay grade, right? And also what you envision your life to be, right? In terms of how much money do you need, right? That's the first question. If Ian were to die tomorrow and you no longer had his retirement, how would that affect your family, right? If you guys have other assets, other ways to pay for that. So it is a discussion in understanding the program, and the potential value of your benefit is really important. And that's why I think it's difficult when you see these big discussions. Hey, did you take it? Yes or no? Well, if you're doing what someone else did, you're basing your decision off of someone else's benefit, right? Now, that being said, it's a tough one. So when we had to make the decision, I had probably taught 300 classes on SBP, done a couple of hundred one-on-ones, but suddenly it was my money. Right? Like, wait a second, right? It's my money. It's a 30-year decision. And it's not just a financial decision, right? There's that whole emotional side of it. You serve 20 plus years, you have this benefit. Would you want it to end after investing, so much of your life, into this service? Would you want to just walk away with nothing? And sometimes it's your money personality, right? My poor husband, I have a hard time spending money, right? I'm a financial counselor. It's just how it is, right? But there is some piece of knowing that, no matter what happens with our other assets, right? What happens with the economy, right? That you have this guaranteed source of income, right? That comes with retirement and, later in life, right? So there's that emotional aspect. For me, maybe I'll be okay spending a little bit of money knowing that I don't have to worry about replenishing the pot, right? Our civilian friends, it's a completely different conversation, right? Because when you say retirement, you have to live off what you have accumulated in your retirement accounts or your assets, right? So we have this amazing benefit, right? So I think it's just a little bit more beyond the financial part as well, right? Just that peace of mind sometimes. So it can be a really difficult decision, right? 30 years could be a chunk of change. But on the other side, the value is pretty exceptional. It doesn't really compare to other financial products out there. So please do take the time to understand this. And the thing is, the decision is made on the 2656 form, DD 2656, which typically when you're going through the process of retirement, those admin folks, whatever branch you're in, they want that form, right? 60 days out, 90 days out, right? Maybe even longer. But you do have up until midnight of your retirement date to change your SBP election. So sometimes I've had people like, I felt all this pressure. I got my forms turned in, right? And then they'll come to a class or they'll get more information. I'm like, oh, I want to change my election, but I already did it. Well, you can up until midnight. After midnight, then we've got a problem, right? Because you're pretty much locked in, at least for these 2 years, right? But give yourself the space, to think about it. And just like you had a great point, with the VA claims, that's what I tell people as well, do your claim and then sit on it, right? And then think it, right? And the same thing with this election. Also, folks that are separating, remember, if you decide to continue your next chapter, your next tour in the Guard Reserves, you're going to have that option as well if you serve long enough, in that component to earn retirement. So it's still something you might want to consider, right? Or at least think about, kind of know the nuts and bolts before you, just leave the brief and go get extra coffee, right? Because it could apply to you in other situations as well.
Yeah, no, those are fantastic points, and I really appreciate you bringing all of that up. And please correct me if I'm wrong on this as well, but I understand that an election into SBP isn't automatically the full amount that is taken out. You can incrementally opt into, I guess, a lower portion of what the benefit could provide later in life. Is that true?
Absolutely. Great point. So yes, you can elect anywhere from $300 up to your full gross monthly retirement. So you do have that space to make that decision. However, the default is your full retirement. So if you do nothing, I'll just check the box, not have this discussion, you will be enrolled for the full amount with your spouse as the beneficiary. So really and truly, when I think back, that was the only decision that I had in 26 years, right? Because the SBP election was actually the spouse election.
That's right.
So you're absolutely correct. You can change that amount. And many people don't realize that. It's either a yes or no. But really, it's the first question is yes or no. Okay. The second part of the yes is how much do I want to cover?
That's right.
But if it's not going to be your full amount, then Andia gets to decide and she's got to sign off on that form.
That's right. That's right. And those are excellent points. And I appreciate you bringing that up, or really closing that loop and just, making that point, because we do have friends that have opted for lower thresholds in that. So, definitely an option that is, I think, not very well known out there. So, but yeah, again.
Yeah. And also the child only. That's a huge one
right.
that people don't realize as well. Yeah. So lots of pieces to that. So just get informed, know all the information, make sure you're getting your information from credible sources, right? There are regulations that you can just pull up online and actually get the correct information instead of 20, I thinks, right? From very well-intended people that maybe don't have it quite right?
That's right. Yeah. The barracks lawyers sometimes, as we call them, so yeah.
One thing I did want to mention too, because you mentioned it, which is that there's no real good comparison on the civilian side, right? And I think the reason that exists and the reason I want people to pause and think about SPP and understand everything is because the reason SPP does exist and the reason a military pension still exists is because as military spouses, your story is very similar to mine. I did not work for the first almost decade of his career, right? And so thinking about the fact that I stayed home, keeping my, professional goals on the back burner. And then I sort of think of that retired pay as our asset we built together as a family when I was not working and was not building my own retirement funds. So for us, that was part of the calculus. So I just thought that was interesting that you mentioned that also, where there's no real comparison on the civilian side, because obviously that's a reason it exists on the military side, where military spouses do give up a lot. And a lot of times that's professional, and that is, our own retirement funds too.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of going down that same track, kind of maybe getting off of SBP specifically, can you talk about any other benefits that transitioning service members and perhaps their spouses should consider? Do you have, your top three? And the last part that I'll kind of add to this very long question is, when we talk about benefits planning, it's not just a one-time thing. And I really like that you're look at the multiple chapters piece, right? Transition planning and benefit planning shouldn't be a one and done. It should be evaluated, repeatedly, I think, throughout your life. What are your thoughts kind of in that space?
Oh, absolutely. Because life changes a lot, right? Just when we think we have a clear road, then there's a detour, right? And I'm really glad you brought that up, because one thing I really like to share is the value of using marriage counseling. Really and truly, nobody wants to talk about that, right? But transition, it is tough, right? On many different levels, right? You're losing your identity, your sense of purpose, both for the member and the spouse, potentially, right? And just talking through those feelings, right? And I knew that my husband was going through things, but I didn't know how to respond. Now, I couldn't find any therapist that would take new clients with TRICARE, right? But Military One Source, that is a very misunderstood and underutilized benefit. Military One Source has mental health counseling, marriage counseling. So we found a fantastic person that we could go to in person. It wasn't virtual, but down the street, in our neighborhood in person, 6 months, before the actual retirement date. And then you can use Military One Source for a year after you retire, right? So that was a really valuable benefit, because the reality is, even though I would say things to my husband, coming from a third party saying exactly the same thing, sometimes resonated a little bit differently, right? And it also gave me tools to kind of put on different glasses, right? To see things in a different light as we move forward. So, that's one that I would really encourage, especially the use of Military One Source, because I know we have a huge shortage of, mental health and counseling opportunities, and many people just don't think about that. But for us, it really helped with that transition in terms of what we needed to talk about and how we needed to talk to each other, right? And
Excellent.
a lot of things came up that, we never, we just kind of were so busy, with life. That we didn't have a chance to talk about. So that was a big one, using those resources. And again, adjusting once the dust settles and you get into the states where you're going to call home for this next chapter, what benefits are available at the state level? Because we think about DOD, for our Coast Guard family, you get your benefits. There's still a lot of benefits from DOD, even though you're not under DOD, but, Homeland Security and all that. We think those benefits, retirement, we think VA benefits, but the states will also often offer different benefits, mostly depending on your disability rating, but not always. Sometimes just your veteran status. So making sure that you utilize the benefits at the state level. There could be education benefits. I mean, property tax exemptions, free hunting, fishing licenses, things like that, right? So just advocating, all of that. So just don't forget about those. And then as you do get your rating, again, please don't force yourself into a funnel to have to do that immediately, but then see, at that rating, what other benefits open up to you, right? There may be some spouse benefits, right? Now, we have some benefits now. And so from the state of Virginia, right? So I'm like, hey, maybe my next chapter, I will go and take some classes because now we have these additional benefits, right? Even though I didn't really, intend, for myself to go back to school, I feel like I'm able to do advocacy through other ways, right? But why not, right?
Yeah,
Now have these benefits. So just continually assessing, even, with the life insurance, that's a whole nother tangent, but so many classes, people are like, I have to, have $1 million of life insurance. I have to have 6 times my annual salary. Your needs are constantly changing. So having those money dates, to check in with each other, to talk about your goals, to talk about, what's changed, what you're envisioning differently, and then just reassess. That's a really important part of it. And then once you know what your benefits are going to be, that changes the scenario as well, right? I remember when Sean hit 20 years and it was like, now we know we're going to have this retirement check. Well, how much do we want to keep hoarding into retirement accounts that we can't use till we're 60 versus how much do we want to enjoy life with the boys right now, right? So kind of having those conversations because we do have these additional benefits. And then, of course, you have taxes, which sucks. That's the bad part about transitioning, right?
Yeah, we will have an episode about taxes.
Yes. So do that. But, and that's something that hits both retirees and separatees, understanding that healthcare costs and things like that. So just, continually learning, right? And using resources like you guys are amazing to do this podcast so people have access to correct information and it gets them thinking about these things as we evolve into the next chapters.
Absolutely. No, Heather, that is fantastic. I really like how you threaded through those other resources and it goes so far beyond just the survivor benefit piece that, I think this is a good opportunity to preemptively invite you back for future topics. And I think that, your knowledge base and being able to, as you say, point people to the right direction and give them the resources that are factual, that are based in policy and process, that gives them the things that they need that are accurate and gives them the tools to be able to continually evaluate their position as it changes with life, which I think is an excellent point. So kind of on that, I think we've got some...
We have some games to play with you now. This is fun. So the first one is called What's in Your Rucksack? So this is a fun little exercise in military life. And, what would you virtually sort of leave behind and what would you take from military life and carry that with you into now your transitioned civilian life? So what would you leave behind? What are you bringing along with you?
All right. I want to take in with me to this transition a speed dating app. Because I feel like we intrinsically in the military have these speed dating apps, like you go to the school open house and it's like, oh, I've met you 5 minutes, but I have to put emergency contact. It's you, right? And then just because you were a military spouse, now you're my best friend and you can come over for coffee anytime, right? So we get to have those opportunities. But, when you transition, you can't walk into someplace and expect to write down, this is your emergency contact now, right? So I wish that we had a little bit more ways to meet people, right? That's a little bit harder. I used to meet people a lot through my kids, right? The little play groups. Then I got to meet people through, the spouse groups and the coffee and the welcome things at the, family readiness centers. Now in transition, we struggle a little bit more with that. Wish I could have like that speed dating app again, right?
Love that.
That is awesome. Yeah, I love it.
What I'm happy to leave behind, this is a little bit different, but that third party in our marriage. Right? Because I feel like for 26 years, there was always this third party, like that was lingering kind of the needs of the Air Force first, right? Yep. So I'm kind of glad to leave that one behind, right? And now we can move in just focusing on us. We don't have this third party making decisions about, what we do, how we spend our time, right? So that was a good one just to kind of to leave on the side of the road.
Yeah. That's such a great point.
Love it. Love it.
Totally get that.
Absolutely. All right. So it's my turn to ask our couple of questions on our next game. So our next game we call Two Truths and a Lie military style. And our last episode, we had Chief Master Sergeant retired Jay France. He spent a little over 31 years in the Air Force. And we asked him these questions. And we're going to give you the opportunity to guess and then share your two truths and a lie. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Jay said, 1, he almost was forced to separate after his first enlistment due to poor evaluations. 2, he almost became a U.S. Air Marshal. And 3, he almost crossed into the Army in the midpoint in his career in the Air Force. Which one do you think is the lie?
Going into the Army. He's got to be too smart for that one. No.
Actually, close, but it was the Air Marshals. It was the Air Marshals. He was given a job offer and actually turned them down, but he did consider apparently going into the Army in his time in JSOC. So, yeah, it's interesting what you learn about people when you ask them. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, Heather, so over to you. What are your two truths and a lie? And then we'll, of course, reveal these on the next episode and play the same game with our next guest.
Mm. All right, so here's one. You will definitely display all of the challenge coins that you have so meticulously carried with you from station to station. When you are done, you will have an appropriate display of all of those. You will definitely miss going to military balls. And let's see, having a dog is an important part of the transition.
Ooh, those are all excellent.
Those are
all right. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to reveal the answers on the next episode of the next tour.
Yes. Thank you so much for being with us, Heather. It was fantastic to have you as our guest. I'm sure, as Ian said, we are going to have you on again because I feel like you're a wealth of knowledge we need to keep tapping into. And we really appreciate everything. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. And we'll see you next time on the next tour.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Heather.
The views, opinions, and advice expressed by our guest on the next tour are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, Ian, Andia, or any affiliated organizations. While we strive to provide helpful and accurate information, this podcast is for informational purposes only. We encourage listeners to consult with professionals or conduct their own research before making any significant decisions related to military transition or post-service life. The content is intended as guidance and personal perspective, not as official advice.